Picture this. You're standing in front of 43 family members at a baby shower, and your own mother just announced to everyone that you're a failure. Jessica, you're 29, mija. You're still a waitress. When are you going to get serious about your future? The silence was deafening. Every aunt, uncle, and cousin stared at me, waiting to see how the family disappointment would respond. What they didn't know was that in 6 weeks, my restaurant chain would be trading on NASDAQ, making me the youngest Latina CEO to take a company public in Arizona's history. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jessica Isabella Martinez, and if you had told me 5 years ago that I'd be sitting in the corner office of a 7-location restaurant empire, I would have laughed until I cried. Not because I didn't have dreams, but because those dreams felt so impossibly far from the world I knew. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Phoenix, Arizona, success looked very different from what I eventually built. My parents, Carlos and Elena Martinez, arrived in Phoenix from Guadalajara in the early 1990s with 2 suitcases, a pickup truck older than I am now, and the kind of determination that only comes from leaving everything you know for something better. My father started working construction during the day and took plumbing classes at night. My mother cleaned office buildings before dawn and watched neighbors' children in the afternoon. They were building something, slowly and carefully, one paycheck at a time. By the time I was born in 1995, they had managed to save enough to start Martinez Plumbing Services. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and it provided for our family. My childhood was filled with the sound of my father's work boots, on the front porch every evening, and the smell of my mother's cooking filling our small house on Buckeye Road. We weren't wealthy, but we were stable, and in my parents' eyes, stability was everything. Elena Martinez had very specific ideas about what success should look like for her daughters. Having sacrificed her own education to support the family business, she was determined that her 3 girls would have professional careers that commanded respect. She would point to women in our neighborhood who had become nurses, teachers, or office managers and say, "Mira, mijas, education is your way out. You don't want to work with your hands like your father and me." My oldest sister, Anna, embraced this vision completely. She studied relentlessly through high school, earned a scholarship to Arizona State University, and graduated with a nursing degree. Anna now works at Phoenix Children's Hospital, wears scrubs that she somehow makes look elegant, and owns a small house in Ahwatukee with her husband Michael, who works for the city planning department. When family gatherings happen, Anna is always the example everyone points to as the success story. Carmen, my middle sister, took a different but equally approved path. She married her college boyfriend Roberto during her junior year at ASU, where she was studying early childhood education. Roberto became a dentist, and Carmen now runs the front office of his practice while raising their 2 children. They live in a beautiful house in Chandler with a 3-car garage and a pool, and Carmen drives a white BMW SUV that she parks carefully in our parents' driveway during Sunday dinners. Then there was me, the youngest, the one who was supposed to learn from her sister's examples and follow an even more successful path. I was the baby of the family, born 7 years after Carmen, and my parents had high hopes that I would surpass even Anna's achievements. My mother often told people, "Jessica is the smart one. She's going to be a doctor or maybe a lawyer." But from as early as I can remember, I was drawn to our kitchen. While Anna studied and Carmen practiced piano, I would stand on a wooden stool next to my grandmother Maya, who lived with us until I was 12. Abuela Maya had hands that could transform simple ingredients into magic. She taught me to make tamales by feel, to know when the masa was perfect just by touching it. She showed me how to toast chiles until they released their smoky sweetness, how to balance acid and heat and salt until flavors sang together. "Cooking is love made visible, mija," she would tell me, her weathered hands guiding mine as we shaped empanadas. When you feed people, you nourish more than their bodies. You nourish their souls. My parents saw my interest in cooking as a nice hobby, something that would make me a good wife someday, but certainly not a career path. When high school guidance counselors asked about my future plans, I dutifully said I wanted to study business, because that seemed practical and impressive enough to satisfy everyone's expectations. I graduated from South Mountain High School in 2013 with a 3.8 GPA and a scholarship to Arizona State University. My parents were proud, my sisters were supportive, and I was terrified. Not because I couldn't handle the academics, but because I was about to spend 4 years studying something that felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit. The business program at ASU was rigorous and competitive. My classmates seemed to have been born understanding concepts like market analysis and corporate strategy. They spoke confidently about internships at prestigious firms and talked about their futures in terms of six-figure salaries and corner offices. I tried to fit in, tried to care about spreadsheets and profit margins the way they did, but every fiber of my being resisted. During my sophomore year, I started working part-time at Danny's Diner on Central Avenue to help with expenses. It was supposed to be temporary, just a way to earn some spending money while I focused on my studies. But something unexpected happened when I started working in that kitchen. For the first time since starting college, I felt alive. Danny's was not a fancy place. The red vinyl booths were cracked, the coffee was strong enough to dissolve metal, and the clientele consisted mainly of construction workers, night shift nurses, and insomniacs who needed a place to sit with their thoughts. But the kitchen was where I discovered something about myself that I had never fully understood. The head cook was a woman named Rosa Delgado who had been working restaurant kitchens for 30 years. She was tough, demanding, and completely unimpressed by my college education. "You want to work in my kitchen?" she said during my first shift. "Then show me you can handle the heat, not just the theory." Rosa became my second teacher after my grandmother. She showed me how to work efficiently under pressure, how to manage multiple orders simultaneously, how to maintain quality when the tickets are piling up and the customers are getting impatient. But more than that, she showed me how a well-run kitchen operates like a symphony, with each person playing their part to create something beautiful. I started experimenting during slow periods, adding small touches to the standard diner fare. A different seasoning blend for the hash browns, a homemade salsa to accompany the breakfast burritos, fresh herbs in the scrambled eggs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Customers began to notice. They started asking for the girl's special, even though there was no such thing on the menu. The problem was that my success at Danny's was directly inverse to my performance in my business classes. The more I loved working in the kitchen, the less I could concentrate on marketing theory and financial management. My grades started slipping. I missed assignments because I was covering extra shifts. I fell asleep in lectures because I had been working until 2 a.m. The conversation with my parents that changed everything happened during Christmas break of my junior year. I had come home planning to tell them that I was thinking about changing my major, maybe studying culinary arts or hospitality management. Instead, my mother greeted me with news that she had already planned my next semester. "Mija, I talked to my friend Rosa who works at Wells Fargo," she said excitedly. "They have an internship program for business students. It's perfect for you. Good experience, and if you do well, they might offer you a job after graduation." I looked around our living room, at the family photos on the wall showing Anna in her nursing school graduation cap, Carmen in her wedding dress, and me in my high school cap and gown. Everyone looked so certain, so settled in their chosen paths. How could I explain that the path they had chosen for me felt like a slow death? "Mom, I've been thinking about maybe switching majors," I said carefully. "Maybe studying something more related to hospitality or food service." The silence that followed was heavy. My father looked up from his newspaper for the first time that evening. Carmen, who was visiting with her family, stopped playing with her toddler son. Even Anna, who was wrapping presents at the dining room table, paused to listen. "Food service?" my mother repeated, her voice rising with each syllable. "Jessica, what are you talking about? You have a scholarship. You're studying business. You're going to have a professional career." "But I love working in the kitchen," I said, my voice smaller than I had intended. "I'm good at it. I think I could really make something of myself in the restaurant industry." My father folded his newspaper and looked at me with disappointment that cut deeper than anger would have. "Mija, we didn't sacrifice everything we did so you could work in kitchens. That's what your mother and I do. We work with our hands so you can work with your mind." Carmen tried to be supportive in her way. "Jess, cooking is a great hobby. You could always cater parties on the side after you get a real job. But you need something stable, something with benefits and a retirement plan." Even Anna, usually my ally, seemed concerned. "Restaurant work is really hard, Jess. The hours are terrible and there's no job security. You're too smart to limit yourself like that." That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, looking at the glow-in-the-dark stars I had stuck to the ceiling when I was 8, I made a decision that would define the next phase of my life. I would finish my business degree because I owed that to my parents and to the scholarship program that had made my education possible. But I would also continue working at Danny's, and I would start planning for a future that looked different from what everyone expected. The next 18 months were a careful balancing act. I maintained good enough grades to keep my scholarship, while spending every free moment learning everything I could about the restaurant business. I read industry magazines during breaks between classes. I watched cooking shows and business documentaries late at night. I saved every penny I earned at Danny's, living on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches so I could build up a small nest egg. Rosa became my mentor in ways that went far beyond cooking techniques. She had started as a dishwasher at 16 and worked her way up through every position in restaurant kitchens. She understood the business from the ground up in a way that my business textbooks never could have taught me. "You want to own restaurants someday?" she asked me one evening as we cleaned up after a particularly busy shift. "Then you need to understand every job, from washing dishes to managing inventory. You need to know what it costs to run a place, how to manage people, how to make customers want to come back." She was right, and I absorbed everything like a sponge. I learned about food costs and labor percentages, about vendor relationships and health department regulations. I studied the successful restaurants in Phoenix, analyzing what made some places thrive while others failed within their first year. Most importantly, I started developing my own vision for what my restaurant could be. I wanted to create a place that honored my grandmother's recipes while appealing to modern tastes. I dreamed of a menu that would introduce people to authentic Mexican flavors while feeling approachable and comfortable. I imagined a restaurant where families like mine could afford to celebrate special occasions, but that would also attract food lovers who appreciated quality and authenticity. I graduated from ASU in May 2017 with a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration. My parents threw a party in our backyard, inviting all the aunts and uncles and family friends who had watched me grow up. Anna gave a speech about following in her footsteps. Carmen presented me with a leather portfolio for all your important business documents. My mother cried happy tears and told everyone how proud she was that all 3 of her daughters had college degrees. What they didn't know was that I had already given my 2 weeks' notice at Danny's and used my savings to put a deposit on a used food truck that would become the first location of Maya's Kitchen. While they celebrated my entry into the professional world, I was secretly planning to leave it behind before I ever really entered it. The food truck cost me $15,000, which represented nearly every dollar I had saved during college. It was a 1998 Chevrolet step van that had been converted for food service by its previous owner, who had run a sandwich business until his retirement. The equipment was old but functional, and the size was perfect for what I had in mind. I spent 3 weeks that summer transforming that truck into my vision. I painted it bright turquoise with hand-lettered signage in yellow and orange. I designed a simple menu featuring street tacos, fresh salsas, and agua frescas made from my grandmother's recipes. The name came to me immediately, Maya's Kitchen, in honor of the woman who had first shown me that cooking was an art form. The hardest part wasn't the renovation or the permitting process, or even the long hours of prep work. The hardest part was not telling my family what I was really doing. Every Sunday dinner became an elaborate performance where I talked vaguely about exploring different opportunities and taking some time to figure out my next step. They assumed I was being responsible, taking time to find the right entry-level position at a good company. Meanwhile, I was learning the food truck business from the ground up. I found a commissary kitchen where I could do my prep work and store inventory. I studied the regulations for mobile food vendors and obtained all the necessary permits and licenses. I researched the best locations and times for different types of customers, learning that office complexes were great for lunch service, while evening events and festivals brought different opportunities. My first day of operation was August 15th, 2017, at the Phoenix Public Market on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon. I had chosen Tuesday because it seemed less intimidating than jumping straight into a busy weekend. I was so nervous that I barely slept the night before, running through every possible scenario in my mind. The morning prep took longer than I had anticipated. My hands shook as I diced onions and chopped cilantro, double-checking every measurement against the recipes I had written on index cards. By the time I drove the truck to the market, my shirt was soaked with sweat that had nothing to do with the August heat. My first customer was an older man in work clothes who ordered 2 carne, asada tacos and a horchata. I watched him take his first bite, my heart hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. He chewed thoughtfully, took another bite, then returned to the window. "This is really good," he said simply. "The meat is seasoned perfect, and this salsa has some kick to it. You make this yourself?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Well, keep it up. I'll be back tomorrow." That first day, I sold $127 worth of food. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Every dollar represented someone who had chosen to trust my cooking, someone who had walked away satisfied with what I had created. I drove home that evening exhausted, but more exhilarated than I had ever felt in my life. The next few months were a whirlwind of 18-hour days, constant learning, and gradual growth. Word spread slowly but steadily. Office workers began seeking out my truck for lunch. I started getting invited to weekend festivals and special events. Food bloggers discovered Maya's Kitchen and wrote reviews that brought new customers. But the secret was becoming harder to maintain. My work schedule made it impossible to attend family dinners regularly, and when I did show up, I was often exhausted in ways that sitting in an office all day couldn't explain. My mother began asking pointed questions about my job search, wondering why I hadn't found a position yet. The truth came out accidentally in November, when my cousin Sophia spotted my truck at a festival near Arizona State University. She called my mother immediately, confused and concerned that I was working in food service instead of using my business degree. The phone call that followed was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. The conversation with my mother, that November evening, felt like watching a carefully constructed house of cards collapse in slow motion. Her voice carried that particular tone of controlled disappointment that only Elena Martinez could master. The one that made you feel about 3 inches tall regardless of your actual age. "Sophia says she saw you working at some food truck near the university," she began without preamble when I answered the phone. "She was confused because she thought you were looking for office work. I told her she must be mistaken, that my Jessica wouldn't be wasting her education serving food from a truck." The silence stretched between us as I tried to find words that wouldn't shatter everything. I was sitting in my small apartment kitchen, still wearing the Maya's Kitchen t-shirt I had designed, the smell of cumin and garlic still clinging to my hair from the day's service. The contrast between the life I was living and the life my family imagined for me had never felt more stark. "Mom, I can explain," I started, but she cut me off. "Explain what, mija? Explain why you're throwing away 4 years of college to play with food trucks? Explain why you've been lying to us for months about what you're really doing?" The hurt in her voice was worse than anger would have been. Elena Martinez had worked multiple jobs to help pay for my education, had bragged to her friends about her daughter, the business student, had dreamed of introducing me as her daughter, the professional. Now she was trying to reconcile that dream with the reality of her daughter, the food truck operator. I took a deep breath and made a decision that would change our relationship forever. "Mom, it's not playing. Maya's Kitchen is a real business. I'm making money, I have regular customers, and I'm doing something I love." "Maya's Kitchen?" The confusion in her voice was evident. "You named it after your grandmother?" "Yes, because everything I know about cooking, about bringing people together over food, I learned from her, and from you." There was a long pause before she spoke again, her voice softer but no less troubled. "Jessica, cooking is something you do for your family, not something you do for strangers for money. You have a college degree. You could get a good job with benefits, with a future." What followed was a series of conversations over the next several weeks that felt like negotiating. A peace treaty between two countries with completely different languages. My parents couldn't understand why I would choose uncertainty over stability, why I would risk my future on something as unpredictable as the restaurant business. I couldn't make them see that their version of stability felt like a prison to me, that their definition of success left no room for passion or personal fulfillment. Anna tried to be the mediator, taking me out for coffee to discuss the situation. We met at a Starbucks in Ahwatukee, neutral territory where neither of us felt the weight of family expectations pressing down on us. She looked professional and polished in her hospital scrubs, while I felt suddenly self-conscious in my jeans and Maya's Kitchen hoodie. "I get it, you know," she said, stirring sugar into her latte. "I really do. You want to follow your passion. But Jess, the restaurant business is brutal. Most places fail within the first year. What happens if this doesn't work out?" "What happens? If it does work out?" I countered. "What if I build something amazing and you all missed it because you were too worried about me failing?" Anna sighed, and for a moment she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with her 12-hour shifts at the hospital. "It's not that we want you to fail, it's that we want you to be safe. Mom and Dad, they've seen too many people take risks and lose everything. They just want better for you. But what if their version of better isn't actually better for me?" That question hung between us, unanswered and uncomfortable. Anna was a good nurse and a loving sister, but she had always been the one who colored inside the lines, who followed the approved path. The idea that there might be other equally valid ways to live was foreign to her worldview. Carmen's approach was more direct and less sympathetic. She invited me to dinner at her house in Chandler, where her husband Roberto held court in their beautifully appointed dining room, explaining all the ways my business venture was financially irresponsible. "Look, Jessica," he said, cutting into his perfectly grilled salmon while their housekeeper served vegetables. "I understand the appeal of being your own boss. But food service is a young person's game. The hours are terrible, the profit margins are thin, and you have no benefits. What happens when you want to start a family? What about health insurance? Retirement planning?" His questions were practical and well-intentioned, but they felt like attacks on everything I was trying to build. How could I explain that working 18-hour days in my food truck felt more fulfilling than the thought of sitting in a cubicle for 40 years? How could I make them understand that I was willing to sacrifice conventional security for the chance to create something meaningful? The worst part was that some of their concerns were valid. The food truck business was physically demanding and financially unpredictable. There were days when equipment broke down, when permits were delayed, when bad weather kept customers away and I barely covered my costs. There were nights when I lay awake, calculating expenses and wondering if I was making a terrible mistake. But there were also days when everything clicked perfectly. Days when I sold out of carnitas by noon and had a line of customers waiting. Days when food bloggers posted glowing reviews, or when regular customers brought their friends to try my tacos. Days when I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. By spring of 2018, Maya's Kitchen had developed a loyal following and steady revenue stream. I had learned to read the rhythms of different locations, knew which festivals would be profitable and which corporate events would provide reliable income. I started thinking about expansion, maybe adding a second truck or finding a permanent location. That's when I met David Rodriguez at a food truck festival in Scottsdale. He was there with friends, trying different vendors, and ended up at my window during the dinner rush. I was working alone that evening, taking orders and cooking simultaneously, sweat dripping down my face as I assembled tacos as fast as I could manage. 3 carne asada and 1 veggie, extra salsa verde, he ordered, then paused to watch me work. You're running this whole operation by yourself? Tonight I am, I replied, not looking up from the grill. My part-time help had a family emergency. He waited patiently while I finished his order, not complaining about the longer wait time like some customers did. When I handed him his food, he smiled and said, "This smells incredible. I'm a software engineer, and I thought my job was stressful. This looks like it requires way more skill." Something about his easy manner and genuine interest made me pause, in my rush to serve the next customer. It's definitely a different kind of stress, I admitted. But I love it. It shows, he said. You can always tell when someone really cares about what they're doing. He became a regular customer over the next few weeks, always friendly and curious about the business side of my operation. David worked for a tech startup downtown and often brought colleagues to try my food. He asked thoughtful questions about ingredients and cooking techniques, and gradually our conversations extended beyond simple food orders. When he finally asked me out, it was after a particularly grueling festival day when I was exhausted and probably looked like I had been working in a kitchen for 12 hours straight. "I know you're probably tired," he said as I cleaned up my station. "But would you like to get dinner sometime? Somewhere where someone else does the cooking?" Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant in Central Phoenix. Nothing fancy, but comfortable and quiet enough for actual conversation. I was nervous about dating someone who had a conventional office job, worried that he would have the same concerns about my career choice that my family expressed. But David surprised me with his genuine interest in entrepreneurship and his respect for the work I was doing. "You're building something from nothing," he said over pasta and wine. "That takes incredible courage. Most people talk about starting their own business but never actually do it." "My family thinks I'm crazy," I admitted. "They keep waiting for me to come to my senses and get a real job." "What's more real than feeding people food you made with your own hands?" he asked. "What's more real than creating something that brings people joy?" David's perspective was refreshing and validating in ways I hadn't realized I needed. He understood ambition and risk-taking from his work in the tech industry, but he also appreciated craftsmanship and tradition. He became my sounding board for business decisions and my biggest cheerleader when self-doubt crept in during difficult days. Our relationship developed slowly but steadily over the following months. David often stopped by my truck during lunch breaks, sometimes bringing coworkers who became regular customers. He helped me research locations for expansion and introduced me to business contacts who provided valuable advice. Most importantly, he never once suggested that I should consider getting a more stable job. By late 2018, Maya's Kitchen had grown beyond what I could manage with just a food truck. I had saved enough money to consider opening a brick-and-mortar location, but the decision felt enormous and irreversible. A permanent restaurant would require significantly more capital, more employees, more everything. It would also make my business impossible to hide from my family any longer. The location I found was a small space in a strip mall near Arizona, State University, between a laundromat and a cell phone repair shop. It wasn't glamorous, but the rent was reasonable, the foot traffic was consistent, and there was parking. The previous tenant had been a sandwich shop, so much of the kitchen infrastructure was already in place. Standing in that empty space with David one evening after signing the lease, I felt the weight of what I was committing to. This wasn't a food truck that I could park in my driveway if things went badly. This was a real restaurant with real rent and real employees and real responsibilities. Second thoughts? David asked, watching my face. Third and fourth thoughts, I admitted. What if I'm not ready for this? What if I can't manage a full restaurant? You've been managing a full restaurant, he pointed out. It just happened to have wheels. This is just the next logical step. He was right, but logic didn't calm the butterflies in my stomach, or quiet the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like my mother warning me about taking unnecessary risks. The restaurant business was notoriously difficult, with razor-thin profit margins and brutal competition. I would be competing against established chains with bigger marketing budgets and more experience. But I also knew that I had something they didn't: authenticity, passion, and recipes that had been perfected over generations. Maya's Kitchen wasn't trying to be everything to everyone. We were trying to be the best version of ourselves, serving food that honored our heritage while appealing to modern tastes. The renovation took 3 months and consumed nearly all of my savings. I did much of the painting and decorating myself, working late into the night to transform the generic space into something that felt warm and welcoming. I hung photographs of my grandmother in the kitchen, displayed the awards the food truck had won, and created a mural on one wall depicting scenes from Mexican markets. The menu for the restaurant location was expanded but focused, featuring the most popular items from the food truck, plus some new additions that required the more sophisticated kitchen equipment. I hired 3 employees: Maria, an experienced line cook who had worked at several successful Mexican restaurants; Tommy, a college student who would handle counter service and delivery orders; and Sandra, a middle-aged woman who would help with prep work and keep me organized. Training my new team while finishing the restaurant renovation while continuing to operate the food truck was the most challenging period of my entrepreneurial journey so far. There were days when I questioned every decision I had made, when the stress felt overwhelming and the financial pressure kept me awake at night. But there were also moments of pure excitement, like when I saw the new sign go up reading Maya's Kitchen in bright letters, or when the health inspector approved our final setup. The grand opening was scheduled for March 15, 2019. I had planned a soft launch with friends and family, but as the date approached, I realized I couldn't avoid telling my parents any longer. The restaurant was 5 miles from their house, and it was only a matter of time before someone they knew spotted it and asked questions. I invited them to dinner at my apartment, cooking one of my grandmother's recipes that I knew they loved. As we sat around my small table sharing pozole and fresh tortillas, I finally told them the truth about how much Maya's Kitchen had grown. "You opened a restaurant?" my mother asked, her spoon halfway to her mouth. "A real restaurant with tables and everything?" "Yes, and I want you both to come to the opening next week. I want you to see what I've built." My father, who had been mostly quiet during our recent conversations about my business, finally spoke up. "Mija, do you know how many restaurants fail? Do you know how much money you could lose?" "I could lose everything," I agreed, "but I could also build something amazing. And I'm already building something amazing." The opening night of Maya's Kitchen was both terrifying and exhilarating. My parents came, along with Anna and her husband, and Carmen with Roberto and their kids. David brought several of his co-workers, and Rosa from Danny's Diner showed up, with a small bouquet of flowers and a proud smile. Watching my family taste the food I had created in my own restaurant, seeing them look around at the space I had designed and the team I had trained, was surreal. For the first time, They could see Maya's Kitchen as something real and substantial rather than just their daughter's impractical hobby. The reviews were positive, and business grew steadily over the first few months. We developed a lunch crowd of office workers and university students, and dinner service attracted families looking for authentic Mexican food in a casual atmosphere. By the end of 2019, we were consistently profitable, and I was already scouting locations for a second restaurant. That's when everything changed in ways I never could have anticipated. The pandemic hit in March 2020, just as I was preparing to sign a lease for our second location. Restaurants across the country were forced to close or drastically reduce capacity, and many longtime establishments didn't survive. Maya's Kitchen survived because we adapted quickly. Our experience with the food truck had taught us how to be flexible and responsive to changing circumstances. We pivoted to takeout and delivery, created family meal packages, and even started selling some of our salsas and marinades for people to use at home. But more than just surviving, we thrived. While larger restaurants struggled with their overhead and corporate bureaucracy, our small size and local focus became advantages. People wanted to support local businesses, and they appreciated our personal touch and consistent quality. We became a lifeline for families who missed eating out but didn't trust larger chains with their safety. By the end of 2020, despite the challenges of the pandemic, Maya's Kitchen was stronger than ever. We had a devoted customer base, a proven business model, and enough capital saved to begin serious expansion. That's when David suggested something that seemed impossible: franchising. "You've created something special here," he said one evening as we reviewed the year's financial reports. "Other people want what you have. Why not let them have it while you maintain control of the brand and the standards?" The idea of franchising Maya's Kitchen felt both exciting and terrifying. It would mean rapid growth and the potential for significant income, but it would also mean trusting other people to represent the brand I had built with my own hands. It would mean stepping back from the day-to-day operations I loved and focusing more on management and oversight. But it would also mean that my grandmother's recipes and my vision for authentic, accessible Mexican food could reach people across the country. It would mean creating jobs and opportunities for other entrepreneurs who wanted to be part of something meaningful. The process of setting up a franchise system was complex and expensive, requiring lawyers and consultants and systems I had never needed before. But by early 2021, we had our first franchise location open in Tucson, operated by a couple who had eaten at our Phoenix location dozens of times and fallen in love with the concept. Watching them succeed with their own Maya's Kitchen location was incredibly rewarding. They brought their own energy and local knowledge to the brand while maintaining the quality and authenticity that made Maya's Kitchen special. Within 6 months, we had inquiries from potential franchisees in California, Texas, and Colorado. As 2021 progressed and Maya's Kitchen continued to grow, my relationship with my family began to evolve as well. They could no longer dismiss my business as a phase or a hobby when local newspapers were writing feature articles about our expansion and when the financial success was undeniable. But there was still an underlying tension, a sense that they were waiting for the other shoe to drop. They had accepted that Maya's Kitchen was successful, but they still didn't quite understand it or see it as equal to more traditional career paths. Family gatherings often included comments about how nice it must be to play with food for a living, or questions about when I might consider selling the business and using the money to start something more stable. It was Carmen who inadvertently created the situation that would force everything into the open. She was planning a baby shower for our cousin Maria, who was expecting her first child, and she decided to hold it at Steele Indian School Park as a way to accommodate the large extended family gathering that any Martinez celebration inevitably became. "You should come," she told me during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations. "Maria specifically asked about you, and it's been too long since we've all been together." I hesitated, knowing that family gatherings had become complicated terrain to navigate. There was always an undercurrent of judgment about my choices, even when people were trying to be supportive. But Maria was one of my favorite cousins, someone who had always been kind and encouraging, and I genuinely wanted to celebrate this important milestone in her life. "I'll be there," I promised, not knowing that this decision would lead to the most pivotal moment in my relationship with my family. The morning of Maria's baby shower arrived with the kind of Phoenix heat that makes you question why anyone ever thought building a city in the desert was a good idea. By 9 a.m., the temperature was already climbing toward triple digits, and the weatherman was promising another record-breaking day. I stood in front of my closet, trying to decide where to navigate the complex social dynamics of a Martinez family gathering. The yellow sundress I finally chose was cheerful without being flashy, expensive enough to show I was doing well without appearing to show off. I had learned over the years that every clothing choice at family events was scrutinized and interpreted, that somehow a dress could communicate messages about success, humility, and family loyalty all at once. The irony wasn't lost on me that I now owned 7 restaurant locations, but still felt nervous about what my aunts might think of my outfit. David was already at his laptop when I emerged from the bedroom, reviewing documents for a client meeting scheduled for Monday morning. His software consulting business had grown substantially over the past year, partly due to referrals from restaurant owners who needed better systems for managing multiple locations. We made a good team, complementing each other's strengths and providing support during the inevitable challenges of entrepreneurship. "How are you feeling about today?" he asked without looking up from his screen, though I could hear the concern in his voice. He had witnessed enough of my family dynamics over the past 3 years to understand that these gatherings were emotionally complicated for me. "Like I'm preparing for battle," I admitted, checking my reflection one more time in the hallway. Mirror. But a battle where everyone pretends to be having a lovely time. David closed his laptop and gave me his full attention. "What's the worst thing that could happen?" It was a question he often asked when I was spiraling into anxiety, a way of helping me separate legitimate concerns from borrowed trouble. I thought about it seriously before answering. "They'll treat me like the family charity case again. Poor Jessica, still playing restaurant while everyone else has real careers. Or they'll be condescending about my success, like it's cute that I'm doing well with my little food business, but it's not actually serious. And what's the best thing that could happen? They'll finally see Maya's kitchen as something legitimate. They'll respect what I've built instead of treating it like a phase I'm going through." David stood up and wrapped me in a hug that smelled like coffee and the lavender detergent he insisted on using. "Whatever happens, you know who you are and what you've accomplished. Their opinion doesn't change the reality of what you've built." He was right. Intellectually, I knew that. But families have a way of reducing you to the person you were at 12 years old, regardless of how much you've grown or changed. In the Martinez family, I was still the youngest daughter who dropped out of business school to work in restaurants, and that narrative seemed to override any evidence to the contrary. The drive to Steel Indian School Park took me through neighborhoods where I had delivered countless food truck orders over the years. Past the office complex where I had built a lunch following of accountants and insurance agents who became some of my most loyal customers. Past the community college where I had catered faculty meetings and graduation parties. Past the medical center where Anna worked, where she had finally convinced her colleagues to try Maya's kitchen for their department celebrations. This part of Phoenix was woven through with memories of building my business one customer at a time, one location at a time, one small victory at a time. Driving through it reminded me that I had created something real and valuable, something that employed 36 people across 7 locations and brought joy to hundreds of customers every day. The park was already bustling with activity when I arrived at 1:15. Carmen had reserved a large ramada near the playground, and I could see her directing the setup with the efficiency of someone who had organized dozens of family events over the years. Pink and gold balloons tied to every available surface announced the celebration, and folding tables were being loaded with enough food to feed a small army. Martinez family gatherings operated on a potluck system that had evolved over decades of practice. Everyone contributed something, but there was an unspoken hierarchy of dishes that reflected both culinary skill and family status. The aunts brought their signature specialties, the dishes they were known for and that people requested at every gathering. The younger cousins brought safer options like chips and soda, while the new in-laws contributed store-bought items that were politely accepted but privately critiqued. I had agonized over what to bring, knowing that my contribution would be analyzed and discussed. Too fancy and I would be accused of showing off. Too simple and it would be seen as evidence that success hadn't changed my fundamental character, flaws. I finally settled on tres leches cake, made from my grandmother's recipe, but with my own touches that elevated it beyond the traditional version. The cake had turned out perfectly, with delicate sponge layers soaked in the ideal ratio of 3 milks and topped with cinnamon-dusted whipped cream. It was beautiful and delicious, and represented the best of both tradition and innovation. If anyone wanted to judge me based on my contribution to the family feast, they would have to work hard to find fault with it. Carmen spotted me immediately as I approached the ramada, her face lighting up with genuine warmth. Whatever our differences about career choices, my middle sister had always been generous with affection and support. She hurried over to help me carry the cake and the folding chairs I had brought from my car. "Jess, you look gorgeous, and this cake looks incredible. Did you make it yourself?" "Of course she made it herself," interrupted my Aunt Rosa, appearing at my elbow with the speed that only aunts possess when there's family gossip to be gathered. "Jessica always was good in the kitchen, even as a little girl. Remember how she used to help her abuela with the Christmas tamales?" Aunt Rosa's tone was affectionate, but carried the subtle implication that cooking was a nice skill for a woman to have, but not necessarily something to build a career around. She hugged me warmly and asked about my health, my apartment, whether I was eating enough, all the questions that Mexican aunts are required by law to ask their nieces. "And how is your little restaurant doing?" she continued, accepting the 3-part question structure that seemed to govern all family inquiries. "Carmen tells me you're expanding. That's so nice for you." Before I could answer, my cousin Sophia appeared with her 2 young daughters in tow, both girls sticky with juice and excitement about the party. Sophia had always been one of my favorite relatives, close enough in age that we had been playmates as children, but far enough apart that we avoided the sibling rivalry that sometimes complicated cousin relationships. "Jessica, I'm so glad you came. Isabella, Emma, come say hi to your prima Jessica. Girls, she owns all those Maya's Kitchen restaurants I told you about." The little girls regarded me with the solemn attention that children reserve for adults, who might be important, but whose significance they don't fully understand. Isabella, the older one at 7, finally spoke up. "My mom says you make the best tacos in Phoenix." "That's very nice of your mom to say," I replied, charmed by their directness. "Do you girls like to cook?" "I want to be a chef when I grow up," Emma announced with the confidence of a 5-year-old who had recently discovered the Food Network. "But Daddy says chefs work too hard and don't make enough money." The casual way she repeated her father's assessment of my chosen profession stung more than I expected. Even the children were absorbing the family's subtle message that restaurant work was somehow lesser than other careers, that passion and creativity were luxuries that practical people couldn't afford. Sophia looked embarrassed and quickly redirected the conversation. "Girls, why don't you go help Grandma Elena set up the gift table?" As the afternoon progressed, I found myself falling into familiar patterns of family interaction. I helped arrange food on serving tables, admired baby gifts, and made small talk with relatives I hadn't seen in months. But underneath the pleasant surface, I was acutely aware of the undercurrents of judgment and comparison that always flowed through these gatherings. My cousin Miguel, now an assistant manager at a bank, made sure to mention his recent promotion and the new house he and his wife were buying in Gilbert. My sister Anna discussed her supervisor role at the hospital and the continuing education courses she was taking to advance her career. Carmen's husband Roberto held court near the beverage station, explaining some complex dental procedure to anyone within earshot. Each conversation felt like an opportunity for relatives to establish their place in the family hierarchy of success. And somehow, despite Maya's kitchen's obvious growth and profitability, I still felt like I was fighting to prove that my achievements were legitimate. The worst part was that some of the subtle dismissal came from genuine care. My relatives weren't malicious people. They were genuinely concerned about my well-being and financial security. They had watched too many friends and neighbors struggle with unreliable income and lack of benefits. They wanted to see me settled and secure in ways that they understood and trusted. But their caring came with conditions that required me to diminish my own accomplishments in order to make them feel comfortable. I was supposed to be grateful for their concern while ignoring the fact that my business was more successful than many of their traditional careers. I was expected to be humble about my achievements while listening to detailed accounts of everyone else's professional progress. Maria, the guest of honor, finally arrived fashionably late in a flowing maternity dress that made her look radiant despite the oppressive heat. She was 6 months pregnant with her first child, married to a sweet man named Luis, who worked as an electrician and treated her like absolute royalty. Watching them together reminded me why I had wanted to attend this celebration despite my ambivalence about family gatherings. The gift opening proceeded according to the established ritual, with Maria seated in the place of honor, while relatives offered advice about everything from breastfeeding to college savings plans. The presents were thoughtful and generous, reflecting the family's commitment to supporting each other through major life transitions. When Maria opened my gift, a beautiful wooden high chair handcrafted by a local artisan who supplied furniture for several of my restaurants, she gasped with genuine delight. "Jessica, this is gorgeous. Where did you find it?" "One of the artists who makes furniture for Maya's kitchen created it specially for you," I explained. "It's made from reclaimed wood and finished with non-toxic materials." Several relatives crowded around to examine the high chair, admiring the craftsmanship and elegant design. For a moment, I felt proud of the thoughtfulness of my gift and the connections I had developed through my business that allowed me to offer something unique and special. Then my Uncle Roberto, Carmen's father-in-law, who always had opinions about everything, picked up the chair to examine it more closely. "This is very nice," he said in the tone people use when they're about to deliver a criticism. "It must have been expensive. I hope you didn't spend too much money trying to impress people. Store-bought would have been just fine." The comment landed like a slap, implying that my gift was somehow inappropriate or showy. Never mind that it had cost less than some of the other presents that had been opened without comment. Never mind that it was made by someone whose business I supported and whose work I genuinely admired. The fact that it came from my world, my network, my understanding of quality and craftsmanship, somehow made it suspect. I felt my cheeks burn, but managed to respond calmly. It wasn't expensive, and I thought Maria would appreciate having something unique for the baby. "Of course she appreciates it," my mother said quickly, sensing the tension in the exchange. "It's beautiful and very thoughtful." But the damage was done. Once again, I had been reminded that my professional relationships and business success were viewed with suspicion rather than respect. My network of artisans and vendors and fellow entrepreneurs was seen as frivolous rather than valuable. My ability to source unique items and provide special experiences was interpreted as showing off rather than generosity. As the afternoon wore on, the heat became increasingly oppressive, and the family dynamics increasingly strained. Someone had brought a portable speaker that was playing a mix of Spanish and English music, and the younger cousins were entertaining the children with games and activities. But I found myself feeling more and more isolated, as if I were watching the celebration from behind glass. The breaking point came during what should have been a moment of celebration. Maria was opening cards and reading some of the sweet messages aloud when my mother stood up to address the group. Elena Martinez loved making speeches at family gatherings, and she had clearly been preparing remarks about new babies and family blessings. I want to say something about family, she began, her voice carrying the authority of the family matriarch. Looking around this gathering, I see so much to be proud of. Our children are educated, they have good jobs, they're contributing to their communities. She gestured around the Ramada, pointing out various relatives and their accomplishments. Anna the nurse, Miguel the bank manager, Carmen's husband the dentist, Sophia's husband the teacher. Each profession was mentioned with pride and respect, each career path validated as important and valuable. We have nurses who save lives, teachers who shape young minds, business professionals who build our economy, she continued, her voice growing more emotional. We have raised children who understand the value of hard work and education. Then her eyes found mine, and I knew what was coming before she said it. And we have Jessica, who is 29 years old and still learning what she wants to do with her life. The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. The entire gathering fell silent. 43 relatives suddenly focused on this moment of public assessment. Children stopped playing. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Even the music seemed to fade into background noise. "Mom," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know exactly what I want to do with my life. I'm already doing it." But Elena Martinez was not finished. Perhaps emboldened by having an audience, perhaps frustrated by years of worry about my unconventional choices, she decided this was the moment for tough love. "Mija, you're still a waitress," she said, her voice carrying across the Ramada for everyone to hear. "When are you going to get serious about your future?" The silence that followed felt eternal. Every aunt, uncle, cousin, and in-law was staring at me, waiting to see how I would respond to this public challenge. Some faces showed sympathy, others curiosity, a few poorly concealed satisfaction that the family problem child was finally being addressed directly. I could feel my heart pounding and my hands starting to shake. This was the moment I had been dreading, the public confrontation that would force me to either defend myself or accept their limited vision of my life. For years, I had tried to avoid this exact scenario, had stayed away from gatherings or changed subjects when conversations turned to career comparisons. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the 3 years of building Maya's kitchen into something undeniably successful. Maybe it was the confidence that came from employing dozens of people and serving thousands of customers. Maybe it was simply exhaustion from pretending to be smaller than I actually was. Instead of shrinking away or making excuses, I stood up and looked directly at my mother. "Actually, Mom, I'm not a waitress. I haven't been a waitress for 4 years." The confusion on her face was immediate and obvious. "What do you mean? You work in restaurants. You serve food to people." "I own restaurants," I said clearly, my voice carrying to every corner of the Ramada. 7 of them, actually, and in 3 weeks, Maya's kitchen is going public on the NASDAQ stock exchange. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the silence of people waiting for entertainment or drama. This was the silence of people trying to process information that didn't fit their existing understanding of reality. Uncle Roberto, who had criticized my expensive gift an hour earlier, was the first to speak. "Going public? What does that mean?" "It means Maya's Kitchen is becoming a publicly traded company," I explained, my voice growing stronger with each word. "We're franchising nationally, and investors can buy shares in our growth." My cousin Miguel, the bank assistant manager, dropped his beer bottle. The sound of glass breaking on concrete seemed to snap everyone back to attention. "Wait," he said slowly. "Maya's Kitchen, the Mexican fusion chain. That's yours? That's really yours?" Before I could answer, my 8-year-old nephew Luis came running over from where he had been playing with his tablet near the playground equipment. "Tia Jessica, look, your restaurant is on TV." Luis held up his tablet with the excitement that only an 8-year-old can muster when they've discovered something amazing. The screen showed the Food Network, where a commercial was playing. That made my heart skip several beats. There I was, larger than life on his tablet, standing in the kitchen of our flagship location wearing my chef's coat with Maya's Kitchen embroidered across the chest. The commercial had been filmed 3 months earlier as part of our national expansion campaign. I remembered that day vividly because it had been one of those surreal moments when the success of Maya's Kitchen felt almost impossible to believe. The production crew had arrived at 6 in the morning with lights and cameras, transforming our restaurant into a television set while still allowing us to serve our regular lunch customers. Maya's Kitchen began with a simple dream, my voice, said from the tablet speaker, the sound carrying clearly across the now silent Ramada, to bring authentic Mexican flavors to families across America while honoring the traditions passed down through generations. The camera panned across our open kitchen, showing our team preparing fresh salsas and hand-pressing tortillas. The footage captured the energy and care that went into every dish, the pride our employees took in their work, the warm atmosphere that made Maya's Kitchen feel like an extension of someone's home rather than just another restaurant. From our first food truck in Phoenix to 7 locations across Arizona, the commercial continued, Maya's Kitchen represents the American dream built one family recipe at a time. The final shot showed me presenting a plate of our signature, carnitas tacos, the camera focusing on the care with which each component was arranged. The tagline appeared in bold letters, Maya's Kitchen, authentic flavors, exceptional growth, coming soon to your city. The silence that followed the commercial's end was profound. 43 family members stood frozen in various states of shock, confusion, and dawning comprehension. The only sound was the distant laughter of children playing on the other side of the park, blissfully unaware that their extended family gathering had just experienced a seismic shift. My mother's face had gone completely pale except for 2 bright spots of color on her cheeks. She stared at Luis's tablet as if it might change what she had just seen if she looked hard enough. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above, a whisper. That was you, on television, on the Food Network. It wasn't really a question, but I nodded anyway. The commercial started running last month. We're expanding into California, Texas, and Colorado over the next 18 months. Uncle Roberto, who had been vocal all afternoon about practical career choices and financial responsibility, was studying me with an expression I had never seen before. It was the look of someone recalculating everything they thought they knew about a situation. When you say going public, he said slowly, are we talking about real money? Like significant money? Before I could answer, my cousin Miguel had pulled out his phone and was frantically typing. Maya's Kitchen stock, he muttered, his eyes widening as he read. Holy shit. Sorry, Grandma, but holy shit. Miguel, his mother scolded automatically, but her heart wasn't in it. Everyone was too focused on the revelations unfolding to worry about language. It says here the company is valued at $47 million, Miguel announced, his voice rising with each word. And Jessica owns 68% of the shares. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. I watched my relatives do the mental math, watched them realize that their assumptions about my financial situation had been not just wrong, but dramatically, embarrassingly wrong. Anna, my oldest sister, was the first to recover her voice. Jess, why didn't you tell us? All this time we thought you were struggling, thought you were just getting by. I tried to tell you, I replied, my own voice steadier than I felt. But every time I mentioned the business, someone changed the subject or made a comment about getting a real job. After a while, it seemed easier to just stop talking about it. Carmen looked stricken, clearly remembering countless conversations where she had offered advice about financial planning and career stability. We had no idea it had grown so much. You always made it sound so small. Because you made it clear that you thought it was small, I said, not unkindly but honestly. When people you love keep telling you that your work isn't important, you start to minimize it just to avoid the arguments. David arrived just as this exchange was happening, having finished his client meeting earlier than expected. I watched him take in the scene, the silent crowd, the tension in the air, the tablet still showing the Food Network homepage where my commercial had just aired. His presence immediately made me feel more grounded, more capable of navigating this complicated moment. "How's everyone doing?" he asked cheerfully, seemingly oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. Several relatives stared at him as if he had just materialized from another dimension. "David," my mother said, her voice strange and formal. We were just learning about Jessica's business success. We had no idea Maya's kitchen was so substantial. David's expression shifted as he realized what had happened. He looked at me with a mixture of pride and concern, clearly wondering how I was handling this long overdue revelation. "Jessica's built something incredible," he said simply. "She's created jobs for dozens of people and brought authentic Mexican cuisine to communities that needed it. The expansion is going to help even more families start their own businesses through franchising." The way he talked about my work, with such genuine respect and admiration, created a stark contrast to the years of subtle dismissal I had experienced from my family. Here was someone who understood the value of what I had built, who saw the entrepreneurship and innovation rather than just the food service. Aunt Rosa, who had earlier referred to my little restaurant with affectionate condescension, now approached me with obvious confusion. "Mija, I don't understand. If you've been so successful, why did you let us think you were just working in restaurants? Why didn't you correct us?" The question was fair, but painful to answer honestly. How do you explain to someone that their love felt conditional on your failure? How do you tell family members that their concern for your well-being often sounded like hope that you would give up on your dreams? "Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not for how much money I make," I said finally. "And I was afraid that if I talked about the success, you'd think I was bragging or showing off. But we do love you for who you are," my mother protested, tears starting to form in her eyes. "We've always loved you." "I know you love me," I replied gently. "But you've spent years telling me that my choices were wrong, that I needed to find something more stable, more respectable. It's hard to share good news when you're not sure it will be received as good news." The conversation that followed was unlike any family discussion we had ever had. For the first time in years, my relatives asked genuine questions about my business, rather than offering unsolicited advice about my life choices. They wanted to know about the franchising process, about managing multiple locations, about the challenges of rapid growth. Sophia's husband, the one who had told his daughters that chefs don't make enough money, looked particularly uncomfortable as he realized his 5-year-old had overheard him dismissing the exact career path that had made me more financially successful than anyone else at the gathering. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly when he managed to catch me alone near the beverage table. "I've been repeating assumptions without really knowing what I was talking about." "It's okay," I told him, and I meant it. "The restaurant industry is tough, and most people don't make it. Your concerns weren't unreasonable based on what you thought you knew." But even as I offered forgiveness, I was processing the deeper implications of this moment. For years, I had carried the weight of my family's disappointment, had internalized their message that I was the one who had failed to live up to expectations. Now, it was becoming clear that the failure was not mine, but theirs. Their failure. To see, to understand, to support something they didn't immediately recognize as valuable. The shift in family dynamics was immediate and honestly somewhat disorienting. Relatives who had been politely disinterested in my life suddenly wanted to know everything about the business. Uncle Roberto, who had lectured me about financial planning just hours earlier, was now asking about investment opportunities and franchise territories. "So, if someone wanted to open a Maya's Kitchen in Tucson," he said with studied casualness, How would that work exactly? The irony was not lost on me that the same people who had spent years encouraging me to find a more stable career were now hoping to benefit from the success of my supposedly unstable choice. But I tried to respond with grace, explaining the Bay franchise process and requirements while being clear about the substantial investment and commitment involved. Maria, the guest of honor whose baby shower had been temporarily overshadowed by these revelations, approached me with tears in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you," she said, hugging me tightly. "And I'm sorry we didn't see it before. I'm sorry we made you feel like you had to hide this." Her words meant more to me than she could know. Maria had always been one of the kindest members of our extended family, someone who offered support, without judgment. Having her acknowledge what had happened felt like a form of healing. As the afternoon wound down and relatives began the process of cleaning up and saying goodbye, I found myself in a series of conversations that felt surreal. After years of defending my choices, Carmen apologized for all the times she had suggested I consider something more traditional. Anna expressed amazement at my business acumen and asked if I would speak to a group of nurses who were considering starting their own practice. Most, surprisingly, my mother pulled me aside for a private conversation as David helped load folding chairs into various family cars. "Mija," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I need to ask for your forgiveness. I thought I was protecting you, encouraging you to be practical, but I was wrong about what you were building. I was wrong about what you're capable of." The apology I had never expected to hear brought tears to my eyes. "Mom, you weren't wrong to worry. Most restaurants do fail. Most people don't make it in this business. Your concerns came from love. But I should have listened better," she insisted. "I should have asked more questions instead of making assumptions. I should have supported your dreams instead of trying to replace them with mine." We talked for nearly an hour in the fading afternoon light, working through years of miscommunication and missed opportunities for understanding. She told me about her own abandoned dreams, about the art classes she had wanted to take before marriage and children redirected her life. I began to understand that her fear of my unconventional path came partly from her own regrets about roads not taken. "I want you to bring David to Sunday dinner next week," she said as our conversation drew to a close. "I want to hear about your plans for the business. I want to understand this world you've built." The drive home with David felt like emerging from an alternate universe. We talked through everything that had happened, processing the mixture of vindication and sadness that came with finally being seen for who I really was. "How do you feel?" David asked as we pulled into our driveway. "Relieved," I said after thinking about it, and also kind of grief-stricken. I spent so many years feeling like the family failure, like I was disappointing everyone who mattered to me. Now I find out that the whole narrative was based on their inability to see what was actually happening. "But now they do see it," David pointed out. "And now you get to have relationships with them based on reality instead of their misconceptions." He was right, but the adjustment would take time. I had spent years protecting myself from my family's judgment by keeping my successes small and private. Learning to be fully myself in their presence, to share both challenges and victories without apologizing for my choices, would require rewiring patterns that had been years in the making. 3 weeks later, Maya's Kitchen went public at $18 per share. By the end of the first day of trading, the stock had closed at $31, making the company worth significantly more than anyone had projected. The business news websites ran stories about the overnight success that had actually taken 4 years of 18-hour days to build. My mother called me crying that morning, not because of the money, but because she had watched the opening bell ceremony on CNBC and finally understood the magnitude of what I had accomplished. "I saw you ring that bell," she said through tears, "and I realized that my baby girl had built something that was changing people's lives. The family WhatsApp group that I had left 2 years earlier to avoid the constant comparisons and subtle Criticism suddenly had dozens of messages asking me to rejoin. I did, but with new boundaries about what I would and wouldn't discuss about my business and personal life. The success of the IPO brought opportunities I had never imagined. Food Network offered me a reality show about expanding restaurant chains. Business schools invited me to speak about entrepreneurship and following unconventional paths. Magazine profiles described me as an example of the American dream, the daughter of immigrants who built a multi-million-dollar company from a single food truck. But the most meaningful change was the evolution of my relationship with my family. Sunday dinners became occasions where I could talk openly about both the challenges and successes of running a growing company. My nieces and nephews now saw entrepreneurship as a viable path, understanding that creating something from nothing was as valuable as any traditional career. Anna eventually did start her own nursing practice, drawing inspiration from my example and asking for advice about the business side of healthcare. Carmen began taking photography classes again, rekindling a creative passion she had abandoned years earlier. Even my parents started talking about their own dreams in ways they never had before. The most profound shift was in how I viewed myself within the family structure. I was no longer the problematic youngest daughter who couldn't figure out her life. I was a successful businesswoman who had chosen an unconventional path and made it work through determination, creativity, and hard work. 6 months after the IPO, Maya's Kitchen had 12 locations across 4 states, with plans to open 15 more by the end of the year. We had created over 200 jobs and introduced thousands of customers to authentic Mexican cuisine prepared with care and respect for tradition. Standing in the kitchen of our newest location in Denver, watching my team prepare for the dinner rush, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The years of doubt and family tension, the long hours and financial uncertainty, the gradual building of something that started as a dream and became a reality that exceeded my wildest expectations. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Saw the news story about the Denver opening. So proud of you, mija. Abuela Maya would be proud too. She was right about my grandmother. Everything I had built traced back to those afternoons in our family kitchen. Learning that cooking was about more than just feeding people. It was about creating connection, preserving culture, and expressing love through the ancient alchemy of transforming simple ingredients into something that nourished both body and soul. Maya's Kitchen had become the bridge between the world I came from and the world I was creating. It honored my heritage while embracing innovation, respected tradition while pursuing growth, stayed true to family recipes while adapting to modern tastes and business realities. The little girl who had stood on a wooden stool next to her grandmother, learning to make tamales by feel, had grown up to build something that would outlast her own lifetime. The recipes would continue, the traditions would be preserved, and the dream of bringing people together over good food would expand to touch communities across the country. Sometimes the people who love us most can't see our potential because they're so focused on protecting us from failure. But success isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving yourself right, about having the courage to pursue a vision that others might not understand until they see it fully realized. The family gathering that had started as a baby shower and become a moment of reckoning had taught me that love and understanding don't always arrive on the same timeline. Sometimes you have to succeed quietly until you're ready to succeed loudly. Sometimes you have to protect your dreams from the people who want to save you from them. But when the moment finally comes for truth and recognition, when the people who matter most finally see you for who you really are, the vindication is sweet beyond measure. Not because it proves them wrong, but because it allows them to celebrate what you've known all along. That following your passion with intelligence, persistence, and respect for both tradition and innovation can create something beautiful and lasting and worthy of the love that was always there, waiting to be understood. The morning after the baby shower, I woke up feeling like I had lived through an earthquake that had rearranged the landscape of my entire life. The phone had been ringing since 7 a.m. with calls from relatives who wanted to continue conversations that had been cut short by the evening's end. And my inbox was flooded with messages from family members who had found articles about Maya's kitchen online and were sharing them with a mixture of pride and bewilderment. David was already up, making coffee and scrolling through his laptop, with the focused concentration he brought to complex problems. The sight of him in our kitchen, completely at ease in the life we had built together, reminded me that regardless of how my family relationships evolved, I had a foundation of love and support that wasn't dependent on their approval or understanding. The Phoenix Business Journal wants to do a follow-up story about family businesses and generational entrepreneurship, he said without looking up from his screen. Apparently, someone at the baby shower yesterday posted on social media about your revelation, and it caught the attention of a reporter who's been following Maya's kitchen. The idea that our private family drama had somehow become public made my stomach clench with anxiety. I had spent years carefully managing the public narrative around my business, maintaining professional boundaries between my personal life and the brand I was building. The thought of family dynamics becoming part of the Maya's kitchen story felt invasive and complicated. What did they want to know? I asked, pouring myself coffee and settling into the chair across from him. They're interested in the cultural aspects of your success story, the immigrant family, the traditional recipes, the way you've balanced honoring heritage with modern business practices. But they also want to explore what it means when family expectations and entrepreneurial reality don't align. It was exactly the kind of nuanced business story that could either enhance Maya's Kitchen's brand or create unnecessary drama that would overshadow the actual work we were doing. I had learned to be cautious about media attention, understanding that one misinterpreted quote or poorly framed angle could create problems that lasted far longer than any positive coverage. I think I need some time to process everything before I start talking to reporters about family dynamics, I said finally. Yesterday was a lot. David closed his laptop and gave me his full attention, something I had always appreciated about him. How are you feeling about everything that happened? It was a simple question with a complicated answer. I felt vindicated, but also exhausted, relieved, but also somehow grieving for the years of misunderstanding that could never be recovered. There was satisfaction in finally being seen for who I really was, but also sadness about the energy I had, expended protecting my dreams from the people who should have been supporting them. I keep thinking about all the Sunday dinners I skipped because I was tired of defending my choices, I admitted. All the family events where I felt like I had to minimize my success to make everyone else comfortable. I'm happy that they finally understand, but I'm also angry that it took a public revelation for them to take me seriously. That's understandable, David said gently. You've been carrying the weight of their disapproval for years. It's going to take time to adjust to having their respect. The first test of these new family dynamics came the following Sunday, when my mother called to invite us to dinner with an enthusiasm that felt both genuine and slightly desperate. Elena Martinez was not someone who admitted mistakes easily, and I could hear in her voice the effort it was taking to bridge the gap that years of misunderstanding had created. I want to cook for you, she said, her tone carrying the weight of olive branches and peace offerings. I want to hear about your plans for the business. I want David to feel welcome in our family. The dinner that followed was unlike any family gathering I had experienced as an adult. For the first time in years, I found myself talking openly about the challenges and opportunities facing Maya's Kitchen without feeling the need to downplay or apologize for my success. My parents asked intelligent questions about franchising, about managing rapid growth, about balancing quality control with expansion. Most surprisingly, my father began sharing stories about the early days of Martinez plumbing services that I had never heard before. He talked about the risks he and my mother had taken, the long hours and financial uncertainty, the gradual building of something from nothing that paralleled my own entrepreneurial journey in ways I had never recognized. When we started the plumbing business, he said, passing a bowl of my mother's famous rice and beans, people told us we were crazy to think we could compete with established companies. They said we should just be grateful to have jobs working for other people. Mike, what made you keep going? I asked, genuinely curious about this side of my parents' story that had somehow never been part of our family narrative. Your mother, he said simply, smiling at Elena in a way that reminded me they had been partners in building something together long before I was born. She believed we could create something better for our family, something that would give our daughters opportunities we never had. The irony was both painful and illuminating. My parents had been entrepreneurs themselves, had taken risks and built something from nothing, had faced skepticism and criticism from people who didn't understand their vision. But somehow, when their youngest daughter chose a similarly unconventional path, they had been unable to see the parallels between their journey and mine. I think we were so focused on wanting stability for you girls that we forgot about the satisfaction that comes from building something yourself, my mother added quietly. We wanted you to have the security we didn't have, but we didn't realize that you might have inherited our need to create something meaningful. These conversations continued over the following weeks as the initial shock of the revelation settled into a new pattern of family interaction. Carmen called to ask advice about the photography business she was considering starting on the side. Anna wanted to discuss the financial planning aspects of opening her own nursing practice. Even my teenage cousins began reaching out with questions about entrepreneurship and following unconventional career paths. The most profound change was in how my success was discussed within the extended family network. Instead of being the cautionary tale about the dangers of abandoning practical career choices, I had become an example of what was possible when someone combined passion with business acumen. Relatives who had spent years expressing concern about my choices were now proudly sharing news articles about Maya's Kitchen's expansion with their friends and coworkers. But the newfound respect came with its own challenges. Suddenly, everyone wanted to be part of the Maya's Kitchen success story. Cousins who had barely spoken to me in years were reaching out with business proposals and investment ideas. Extended. Family members began asking for loans, job opportunities, and franchising partnerships with an assumption of entitlement that made me deeply uncomfortable. The most difficult conversation came with Uncle Roberto, who had been one of my harshest critics over the years but now wanted to discuss opening a Maya's Kitchen location in Tucson. He approached the subject with the assumption that family relationships would override normal business protocols, that blood connections would guarantee him favorable terms and reduced requirements. I've been thinking about what you said about franchising, he began during a family barbecue at Carmen's house, his tone suggesting this was a done deal rather than an inquiry. Rosa and I have some money saved, and we think Tucson would be perfect for a Maya's Kitchen. The conversation that followed required all the diplomatic skills I had developed in years of business negotiations. I had to explain that family relationships couldn't circumvent the rigorous vetting process required for franchisees, that opening a restaurant required substantial investment and relevant experience, that I had responsibilities to the brand that superseded personal relationships. You're really going to make me go through the same process as strangers? He asked, clearly offended by the suggestion that family connections wouldn't guarantee special treatment. I'm going to make sure that anyone who represents Maya's Kitchen has the skills and commitment necessary to maintain our standards, I replied firmly. That's not personal. It's professional responsibility. It was a lesson I had to repeat multiple times with different family members as word of our expansion plans spread through the Martinez network. The success that had finally earned their respect also created expectations that threatened to complicate both business relationships and family dynamics. David proved invaluable in helping me navigate these complicated waters. His outside perspective allowed him to see patterns I was too close to recognize, and his business background gave him credibility when discussing the practical aspects of franchise operations with my relatives. You can't let family guilt override good business practices, he reminded me after a particularly difficult conversation with a cousin who felt entitled to investment opportunities based on blood relationships rather than qualifications. The same standards that made Maya's Kitchen successful have to apply to everyone, including family. He was right, but implementing that principle required establishing boundaries that felt foreign after a lifetime of family-first messaging. I had to learn to separate my love for my relatives from my responsibilities as a business owner, to offer support and encouragement, without compromising the systems and standards that protected the brand we had worked so hard to build. The expansion itself continued at a pace that sometimes felt overwhelming. By the end of our first year as a public company, Maya's Kitchen had grown to 22 locations across 6 states, with franchise applications pouring in from entrepreneurs who shared our vision of bringing authentic Mexican cuisine to underserved communities. Each new location required careful oversight to ensure consistency of quality and adherence to our operational standards. I spent weeks traveling between cities, training new managers, refining systems, and solving the inevitable problems that came with rapid growth. The work was exhausting, but deeply satisfying, as I watched the vision that had started in a food truck transform into a national brand. The success brought recognition that still felt surreal. Food and Wine magazine featured Maya's Kitchen in their annual list of restaurant chains to watch. Entrepreneur magazine profiled my journey from college dropout to CEO. The James Beard Foundation invited me to participate in a panel discussion about preserving culinary traditions while building modern businesses. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The Phoenix Hispanic Chamber of Commerce presented me with their Entrepreneur of the Year award at their annual gala, and my grandmother's sister, Tia Carmen, traveled from Mexico to attend the ceremony. Tia Carmen was 92 years old and had been my grandmother Maya's closest confidant and cooking partner during their childhood in Guadalajara. She had never traveled to the United States before, but she insisted on making the journey to see what her nieta had built in honor of Maya's memory. Standing with her at the award ceremony, listening to her tell stories about my grandmother's dreams of opening a restaurant someday, I understood that Maya's Kitchen was part of a legacy that extended far beyond my own ambitions. The recipes I had learned at my grandmother's side carried generations of tradition, and the business I had built was a way of ensuring that those traditions would continue to nourish families for generations to come. Maya would be so proud, Tia Carmen whispered in Spanish as I accepted the award, her weathered hand squeezing mine with surprising strength. She always said you had her spirit, her gift for bringing people together over food. The year following the public revelation at Maria's baby shower transformed not just my relationship with my family, but my understanding of what success actually meant. The financial achievements and business recognition were satisfying, but the deeper reward came from finally being able to share the journey with the people who mattered most to me. Anna eventually did open her nursing practice, and I was able to provide both business advice and a small investment that helped her get started. Carmen discovered that her photography hobby had commercial potential and began building a client base for family portraits and small events. Even my parents began talking about their retirement plans with more excitement, understanding that the security they had worked so hard to achieve could coexist with the pursuit of personal fulfillment. The relationships required constant navigation and occasional difficult conversations about boundaries and expectations. But they were real relationships now, based on mutual respect and genuine understanding rather than disappointed hopes and unmet expectations. 2 years after going public, Maya's Kitchen celebrated the opening of our 50th location with a party at the original restaurant where it all began. The small space near Arizona State University had been remodeled and expanded twice, but we had kept the mural of Mexican market scenes and the photographs of my grandmother that marked it as the heart of everything we had built. My entire family attended the celebration, along with employees from all our locations, franchise partners, and community leaders who had supported our growth from the beginning. Watching my parents mingle with food critics and business reporters, seeing my nieces and nephews proudly explaining to their friends that their tia owned all these restaurants, observing the genuine excitement and pride on faces that had once shown only concern and disappointment, I felt a completeness that had nothing to do with financial success. David found me during a quiet moment in the evening, standing in the original kitchen where I had spent countless hours perfecting recipes and building systems for growth that I could barely imagine at the time. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing the question he had posed during so many previous milestones in our journey together. I thought about the question seriously, considering the years of family tension, the financial risks, the personal sacrifices, the moments of doubt and exhaustion that had marked the path from food truck to national brand. "No regrets about the business," I said finally. "But I wish I had found a way to bring my family along sooner. I wish I had been brave enough to insist on their support instead of accepting their skepticism." "You were protecting your dream," David pointed out. "Sometimes that's what you have to do until you're strong enough to share it." He was right, but I had learned that success shared with people you love is exponentially more meaningful than success achieved in isolation. The validation that came from external recognition paled in comparison to the joy of finally being able to celebrate achievements with the family that had shaped my values and supported my foundation, even when they couldn't understand my direction. The story of Maya's Kitchen had become larger than my individual journey. It was a story about preserving cultural traditions while embracing innovation, about the immigrant experience and the American dream, about the power of food to bring communities together. But at its core, it remained a story about family. The family that gave me recipes and values, the chosen family that supported my vision, and the extended family of employees and customers who made the dream sustainable and meaningful. Standing in that kitchen surrounded by the laughter and conversations of people who had become part of the Maya's Kitchen story, I understood that the greatest success wasn't the financial returns or the business recognition. It was the knowledge that I had honored my grandmother's legacy while building something that would outlast my own lifetime, creating a bridge between the traditions of the past and the possibilities of the future. The little girl who had learned to make tamales by standing on a wooden stool had grown into a woman who understood that the most powerful dreams are the ones that honor where you came from while embracing where you're going. Maya's Kitchen would continue to grow, continue to employ hundreds of people, continue to introduce thousands of families to the flavors and traditions that had shaped my own identity. But the real victory was simpler and more profound. I had become someone my grandmother would recognize and my family could finally celebrate. Someone who had turned the gift of bringing people together over food into a legacy that would nourish communities for generations to come. 5 years had passed since that transformative afternoon at Maria's baby shower, and I found myself sitting in the boardroom of Maya's Kitchen corporate headquarters, preparing for what would be one of the most significant meetings in the company's history. The room overlooked downtown Phoenix, where the skyline had changed dramatically since I first started serving tacos from a turquoise food truck on these very streets. The mahogany conference table was surrounded by faces that represented the evolution of everything I had built. My CFO, Sarah Chen, who had joined us during our second year of expansion and brought the financial expertise that allowed us to scale responsibly. Marcus Williams, our head of operations, whose background in restaurant management had been instrumental in maintaining quality across dozens of locations. Elena Vasquez, our marketing director, whose creative vision had helped Maya's Kitchen become a recognized brand nationwide. But what made this particular meeting extraordinary was the presence of my sister Anna, who had recently been appointed to our board of directors following the successful expansion of her nursing practice into a regional healthcare consultancy. She wore a navy blazer that commanded respect, her confidence evident in the way she reviewed the merger proposal documents spread before us. The Clearwater Restaurant Group had been courting Maya's Kitchen for 18 months, ever since our 100th location opening had caught the attention of major hospitality investors. Their offer was substantial enough to change the lives of everyone in the room, generous enough to ensure that every employee who had contributed to our growth would benefit significantly from the acquisition. "The numbers are impressive," Anna said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned to navigate complex business negotiations through her own entrepreneurial journey. "But Jessica, this isn't just about the financial return. This is about whether you're ready to let someone else steward what you've built." Her question cut to the heart of the decision that had been consuming my thoughts for weeks. Maya's Kitchen had grown beyond anything I had imagined when I first painted. That food truck in my parents' driveway? We now employed over 800 people across 23 states, served hundreds of thousands of customers annually, and had become a case study in business schools across the country for successful franchise operations and cultural authenticity in corporate expansion. The company David and I had built together was financially stable, operationally sound, and positioned for continued growth. The merger would provide resources for international expansion that we couldn't achieve independently, access to supply chain innovations that would reduce costs while maintaining quality, and integration with technology platforms that would enhance the customer experience in ways we had only dreamed about. But it would also mean relinquishing the hands-on control that had defined my relationship with Maya's Kitchen since its inception. Instead of personally approving every new franchise location, I would become part of a larger corporate structure, with shareholders and board meetings and quarterly earnings, calls that prioritized metrics I had never needed to consider when success was measured in satisfied customers and profitable locations. "What does your gut tell you?" asked David, who served as our chief technology officer, and whose insights into digital innovation had been crucial to our competitive advantage in an increasingly crowded market. He understood better than anyone the emotional complexity of this decision, having watched me pour my identity into building something that had become larger than either of us had anticipated. I looked around the room at faces that represented not just business colleagues, but people who had become family through the shared experience of building something meaningful together. Sarah had joined us when Maya's Kitchen was struggling to manage the financial complexity of rapid expansion, bringing order to systems that I had cobbled together through trial and error. Marcus had left a secure position with a major chain restaurant to bet his career on our vision of authentic Mexican cuisine served with genuine hospitality. Elena had been working at a boutique advertising agency when she first tasted our food at a Phoenix festival and became so enthusiastic about our brand story that she pitched us a marketing campaign for free, convinced that Maya's Kitchen represented something special in an industry dominated by corporate uniformity. These were people who believed in what we were doing before it was financially prudent to do so, who had taken risks on our growth when other opportunities might have been safer or more conventional. The decision to merge or remain independent would affect not just my own future, but the careers and financial security of dozens of employees who had invested their professional lives in Maya's Kitchen's success. "I keep coming back to something. My grandmother used to say," I said finally, my voice carrying the weight of consideration that had filled sleepless nights over the past month. She told me that the most important ingredient in any recipe is intention. She said you could follow every step perfectly, but if your heart wasn't in the right place, the food would never taste the way it was supposed to. The room fell silent, as everyone processed what I was trying to articulate. Maya's Kitchen had succeeded not just because we served good food or operated efficient restaurants, but because every decision had been made with the intention of honoring tradition while creating opportunities for growth and connection. The Clearwater proposal would give us resources to expand faster and reach more communities, I continued, thinking through the implications as I spoke. But it would also change the intention behind what we do. Instead of preserving family recipes and creating meaningful employment in underserved areas, we'd be optimizing for shareholder returns and market penetration. Anna leaned forward, her expression thoughtful in the way that indicated she was processing both the business implications and the personal dimensions of the decision. "But Jessica, Isn't there value in reaching more people with what you've created? Isn't there something meaningful about being able to employ thousands more people and introduce authentic Mexican cuisine to communities that might never experience it otherwise? Her question was fair and reflected the complexity that made this decision so challenging. The merger would accelerate our impact in quantifiable ways, allowing Maya's Kitchen to become a truly national brand, with the resources to compete against much larger restaurant chains. We could open locations in smaller cities that couldn't currently support independent restaurants, bringing economic opportunities to communities that needed them while introducing our food to families who would appreciate and embrace it. But rapid expansion also meant less personal oversight, more standardization, and inevitable compromises to the artisanal approach that had distinguished Maya's Kitchen from competitors. The recipes would remain the same, but the care and attention that went into training each manager, selecting each location, and building relationships with local suppliers would be harder to maintain across hundreds of additional restaurants. "What if we structured the deal differently?" suggested Marcus, whose operational experience gave him insights into how large restaurant companies actually functioned. "What if instead of a traditional acquisition, we negotiated a partnership that gave us access to their resources while maintaining control over core brand decisions?" The idea had merit and represented a compromise that might preserve what mattered most about Maya's Kitchen while enabling the growth that would benefit employees and customers. But it would also require complex legal arrangements and ongoing negotiations that could drain energy from the work I actually enjoyed, the creative and cultural aspects of building a brand that meant something beyond its financial performance. Sarah pulled out her laptop and began running calculations on alternative deal structures, her financial expertise evident in the speed with which she modeled different scenarios. If we maintain controlling interest while taking on Clearwater as a strategic partner, we could potentially access their distribution networks and marketing resources without surrendering decision-making authority on menu development, location, selection, and company culture. The conversation continued for 3 hours as we explored possibilities that ranged from complete independence to full merger, with various partnership arrangements in between. By the end of the meeting, we had identified a path forward that felt authentic to Maya's Kitchen's values while acknowledging the realities of competing in a national market. Rather than accepting Clearwater's acquisition offer, we would propose a strategic partnership that gave them a minority stake in the company while preserving our operational independence. They would provide capital for expansion and access to their supply chain advantages, while we would maintain control over brand standards, franchise requirements, and community engagement initiatives. The negotiation process took 6 months and required legal expertise that stretched my understanding of corporate finance and partnership structures. But the final agreement preserved what mattered most while providing resources for sustainable growth that aligned with our long-term vision. The announcement of the partnership coincided with Maya's Kitchen's 10th anniversary celebration, held at the Phoenix location where the journey from food truck to national brand had begun. The event brought together franchise owners from across the country, employees from our corporate offices, and family members who had witnessed the transformation from skepticism to pride over the course of a decade. My mother stood at the podium during the evening program, her confidence evident in the way she addressed a crowd that included business reporters, community leaders, and restaurant industry executives. Elena Martinez had evolved from the woman who once worried about her daughter's impractical career choices into someone who understood that success could take forms she had never imagined. 10 years ago, I thought I knew what my daughter needed to be happy and secure, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. I was wrong about what she needed, but I was right about who she was. Jessica always had the gift of bringing people together, of making everyone feel welcome at her table. Maya's Kitchen just gave her a bigger table. The applause that followed felt like validation, not just of business achievements, but of personal growth that had required courage from both of us. My mother had learned to trust my judgment about my own life, while I had learned to share my successes and challenges with family members who wanted to support me even when they didn't fully understand my choices. David joined me on the small stage as the evening concluded, his presence a reminder of how much had changed since that first food truck festival where we met. He had recently proposed during a quiet weekend at our cabin in Sedona, choosing a moment when we were cooking together rather than making a public spectacle of the occasion. 5 years ago, Jessica stood in front of her family and had to prove that her dreams were valid, he said, addressing the crowd with the easy confidence he brought to every public speaking opportunity. Tonight, we're celebrating not just what she built, but how many other people she inspired to build their own dreams. It was true that Maya's Kitchen's success had created ripple effects that extended far beyond restaurant operations. 3 of our franchise owners had used their profits to start additional businesses in their communities. Our supply relationships had helped several small farming operations expand their production and increase their income. The scholarship program we had established provided culinary education opportunities for young people who might not otherwise have access to professional training. But the impact that meant the most to me was visible in the faces around the room that night. Anna had built her nursing consultancy into a regional healthcare resource that employed 15 people and served dozens of medical practices. Carmen had transformed her photography hobby into a thriving business that specialized in documenting small business success stories across Arizona. Even my teenage cousins had been influenced by watching unconventional career paths lead to meaningful success. Sophia's daughter Isabella was studying business and culinary arts with plans to open her own restaurant someday. Miguel's son Carlos had started a food blog that reviewed authentic Mexican restaurants across the Southwest, building an audience that appreciated his knowledge of traditional cuisine and family recipes. The transformation wasn't limited to my immediate family. Rosa Delgado, my first mentor at Danny's Diner, had used her experience and industry connections to open a cooking school that specialized in traditional Mexican techniques and modern restaurant management. Several of our early employees had leveraged their Maya's Kitchen experience to start their own food service businesses, creating a network of entrepreneurs who supported each other's growth while maintaining the values that had made our original partnership successful. As the celebration wound down and guests began saying their goodbyes, I found myself in conversation with a group of young franchise owners who represented the future of what Maya's Kitchen was becoming. They were diverse in background and geography, but united by their commitment to serving authentic food with genuine hospitality, while building businesses that contributed positively to their communities. What advice would you give someone who's just starting out? Asked Jennifer Liu, who had opened our first location in Portland and was already planning a second restaurant. What do you wish someone had told you when you were painting that first food truck? The question made me think about the 24-year-old version of myself who had been so afraid of family disapproval that she had hidden her business for months. So uncertain about her own judgment that she had almost abandoned her dreams multiple times when the challenges felt overwhelming. Trust your instincts even when other people question them, I said finally. And remember that success isn't about proving other people wrong. It's about proving yourself right. It's about having the courage to build something that matters to you, whether or not anyone else understands it initially. The conversation continued as we shared stories about the obstacles and victories that marked every entrepreneur's journey. These young business owners faced challenges I had never encountered, from social media marketing to supply chain disruptions to labor shortages that required creative solutions and constant adaptation. But they also had advantages I had lacked. During Maya's Kitchen's early years, they had access to established systems and support networks, proven business models, and operational guidelines that eliminated much of the trial and error that had characterized my own learning process. Most importantly, they had examples of people like themselves who had built successful businesses by honoring their heritage while embracing innovation, who had created economic opportunities in their communities while preserving cultural traditions that might otherwise be lost to corporate standardization. The drive home with David that night took us past locations that held memories from every stage of Maya's Kitchen's evolution. The original food truck was permanently parked outside our corporate headquarters, restored to its original turquoise and yellow paint scheme, and serving as both a symbol of our origins and a reminder of how far we had traveled. Any regrets? About not taking the full buyout? David asked as we pulled into our driveway in the Awatuki house we had purchased 3 years earlier. Large enough for the family we were planning, but modest enough to reflect our values about living authentically. Rather than for external impression, I considered the question seriously, thinking about the financial security that complete acquisition would have provided, versus the ongoing responsibility and potential stress of maintaining operational control in a competitive industry. No regrets, I said honestly. Maya's Kitchen works because it represents something real, something that connects people to traditions and communities that matter. Money can't buy that authenticity, and I'm not sure it would survive being optimized for maximum profitability. The partnership with Clearwater had provided resources for expansion while preserving the decision-making authority that kept Maya's Kitchen aligned with its original mission. We were growing sustainably, employing more people, and reaching new communities, but we were doing it in ways that honored the recipes and values that had made the journey worthwhile. 6 months later, I received a call that brought the entire Maya's Kitchen story full circle in ways I never could have anticipated. Maria, whose baby shower had been the setting for my family's revelation about the business, was planning her daughter's first birthday party and wanted to hold it at our original Phoenix location. "Lucia's favorite food is your carnitas tacos," she said, laughing at the absurdity of a 1-year-old having culinary preferences. But seriously, I want her to grow up knowing this story, knowing that her prima Jessica turned her grandmother's recipes into something that feeds thousands of families. The party was small and intimate, attended by the same relatives who had witnessed my public confrontation with years of family skepticism. But the atmosphere was completely different from that tense afternoon at Steele Indian School Park. Children played in the restaurant's designated family area, while adults shared stories about business successes and personal growth that had emerged from watching one family member have the courage to pursue an unconventional dream. My mother spent most of the afternoon in Maya's Kitchen's open kitchen, observing the preparation techniques that our cooks use to maintain consistency while preserving the authentic flavors she had learned from her own mother-in-law. She asked detailed questions about ingredient sourcing and cooking methods, genuinely interested in understanding how traditional recipes could be scaled for commercial production without losing their essential character. "Your abuela would be amazed," she said as we watched the team assemble orders with efficiency that maintained quality. She always dreamed of having a restaurant, but she never imagined anything like this. It was true that my grandmother's vision had been much smaller and more traditional than what Maya's Kitchen had become. But the core intention remained the same: bringing families together over food that nourished both body and spirit, preserving recipes and techniques that connected people to their heritage, creating spaces where everyone felt welcome regardless of their background or economic circumstances. As little Lucia celebrated her first birthday surrounded by family and community, I understood that the story of Maya's Kitchen would continue long after my own involvement ended. The recipes would be passed down to new generations of cooks who would adapt them for changing tastes while maintaining their authentic foundation. The business would evolve to meet new challenges while preserving the values that had made it meaningful from the beginning. The journey from family disappointment to family pride had taught me that success is ultimately about having the courage to define your own path while remaining connected to the people and traditions that shaped your foundation. It's about building, something that honors where you came from while embracing where you're going. Standing in that restaurant surrounded by 3 generations of family, watching children play while adults shared food and stories, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you've created something larger than yourself. Maya's Kitchen had become a bridge between cultures, a source of economic opportunity, and a reminder that the most powerful dreams are the ones that bring people together rather than setting them apart. The little girl who had learned to make tamales by standing on a wooden stool had grown into a woman who understood that the greatest recipes are the ones that nourish communities, not just individuals. And the greatest success is the kind that allows you to share your table with everyone you love, serving food that carries the flavors of tradition and the promise of continued growth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.